Welcome, Highlander fans, to Blood of Kings, a Highlander podcast here on the Fandom Podcast Network. On this show, we cover everything in the Highlander universe. And on this episode, we're going to start from the beginning. Blood of Kings, Highlander podcast, episode 143. We're going to be talking about Highlander, the original 1986 classic. And this is the 35th anniversary celebration. 35 years ago, on March 7th, 1986, debuted here in the U.S. and then continued to debut later throughout the year in other countries. Lee, my co-host, welcome. How are you, sir?
Well, you're going to have to forgive me, Kevin, for I am a worm. Feeling pretty good, man. Feeling pretty good. We've had episodes. You know, we've talked to John a couple times about his book, about the release on video, the various video releases. Kind of magic and all that sort of stuff. And earlier in the summer, we talked about the various physical media releases. But you and I haven't sat down and just talked Highlander, the original movie.
I know.
I think it's kind of cool.
We've referenced it a lot, like you had talked about. Please go back and check out our earlier episodes where we did talk about first of all, Jonathan Melville, who just released a book this last fall, A Kind of Magic, making of the original Highlander book. And I have the poster of it behind me right over here. But you can order his book through Amazon and such. Make sure you check that out because he did over 60 interviews with people in front of and behind the screen. Did a great job with the book. I got it right here in front of me. Awesome book. We talked to him about that. But we also talked about, like you mentioned, the videos. And so what I mean by that is how many different formats that Highlander was actually on when it came to VHS, DVD, Blu-ray, and of course, Laserdisc, which I have over here, my left shoulder. So make sure you check that out. We had a lot of fun discussing the history on all of those. But as you're right.
Episode 132, if I'm looking at the notes here.
Yes, 132 was the history on home video with Jonathan Melville, yeah. And then 137 was the kind of magic, the making of the original Highlander book with Jonathan, and we had a lot of fun about that. But yeah, you and I haven't really dove deep into the original Highlander movie. It came out in 1986. A lot of great movies came out in 1986. Aliens being one of my favorites. Top Gun came out as well. So it was a great year for movies. This one was kind of overlooked, didn't do well in the theater, but it's important. We are here, Lee, on Blood of Kings because of this movie, and I'm holding the VHS copy right here as we videotape this. This is the original clamshell video cassette that was in video shelves all across the USA. But Lee, 35 years ago, man. I mean, does it seem that long ago?
Well, to me, it seems like 26 because I first saw this on video in 1992. Yeah. So, I mean, thinking back to 1986, I remember going to see Top Gun. I remember going to see all these, great movies, wanting but not being able to see a movie you and I just did on CPT, Cobra.
Right.
Which had a couple interesting Highlander connections.
Yep.
But I'm not old enough for this movie to be 35 years old. I think you did some math wrong there, Mr. Raider Nerd.
35 years old. By the way, speaking of Highlander, so when this came out on video, I unfortunately have never seen Highlander on the big screen. Not even in any of its re-releases. Like in the 30th anniversary, there was very select few. They did like a 4K like restoration of it. Have you ever seen Highlander, the original, on big screen, whether it was released or whatever? Yeah.
And there is there's a theater up here called the Landmark. That's been shut down since COVID, coming up on a year now.
And when you say up here, where exactly?
Minneapolis, Minnesota, the Twin Cities. And it's just in this great neighborhood. It's very much an old movie theater, but they're very much fans of cinema with a capital C. And I mean, it's the place where I traveled to see Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels. I traveled from Des Moines to see it because I'd heard about it. And now that I live up here, would see things, and every Friday and Saturday night they'll do special movies. Once a month, it's always Rocky Horror Picture Show, but they'll be doing they'll do Hitchcock, they'll do Highlander.
It's
They
one of
did
those cool
Showgirls.
art house cinemas that will do that. Well, so how long ago was it that you saw it?
I want to say it was 6-7 years ago.
Lucky.
And there is, speaking as somebody who really misses going to movies, there is no comparison seeing this on the big screen with seeing it just at home, which, I mean, I've seen it the first time at home and millions of times since then.
Right.
But the scope of that first transition to Scotland, you just can't get that anywhere else. It's such a magnificent feeling to see it huge like that.
I don't have any recollection of it playing at my local theaters here in Santa Barbara when I was here in 1986. I'm back home in Santa Barbara, California now, but and I'll get into more of that a little bit later because it didn't really do well here in the States, and I think because it wasn't marketed well, and the poster at the time didn't help it either. We'll touch on that. But when it came to re-releases, I've been keeping my eye open for anything around here. But usually, it's been a European thing or an Australian thing, or other select areas, and I haven't had a chance to see it though. But I'm hoping one day I can, even if I have to wait till the 40th anniversary. But before we move on, though, real quick, there is another Highlander movie that's celebrating an anniversary this year, and that would be the 1991. Highlander 2: The Quickening came out in 1991.
Yep. And good or bad, I did enjoy it the first time I saw it because I saw it before I saw the original Highlander.
A lot of people
might have the contrary opinion that a lot of other people do because I wasn't disappointed by not staying to the premise. Oh, and he's got 2 different copies on VHS.
Yes, I do. I got 2 Highlander 2, and what's funny is this one here is still sealed, and it's got I think it's got some catalog inside of it for mailing away stuff, and I got this one here. So, but there's the special edition that has the Renegade version, which is my favorite. But that's something we'll have to maybe bring up later in a future episode of Blood of Kings, is revisiting Highlander 2 since it's celebrating its 30th anniversary. So there you go. Of course, a lot of fans wouldn't use the word celebrate, but I would.
It's in memoriam of.
So let's get into talking about Highlander. Let's do a little plot description here. We all know the plot, but I thought we had a little fun because since I have my original VHS clamshell cassette, that was...
Thank you for opening it. That is one of my favorite sounds in the world.
Oh yeah, look at that! Yeah, sound of that. It's beautiful.
Our generation, that was a Saturday night that was about to go off. I mean, that's just the soundtrack.
I love it. I know. This is how you rented films. You had them in these hard shell cases. But this was the VHS that caught my attention because it showed Conor Mccloud holding up his katana in his trench coat, little drenched after striking the waterworks there in the underground parking lot fighting Iman Fasil. And you're like, present day dude with a sword? What the heck is that all about? And that's why I was interested. I had a friend of mine also recommended it as well. I was like, dude, they cut people's heads off. I'm like, no way. Cool. But I thought that I would read the back of the actual original video cassette tape because it sounds cool. So we'll do that. All right. Conor Mccloud is a Scot who should have died in 1536. But he belongs to a rare race of immortals that can only be killed when beheaded with a sword. Their destiny is to duel through history until the gathering, when the remaining few will battle for supremacy. Mccloud lives in peace for centuries, when his old enemy, the evil Kurgan, arrives to challenge him. With modern-day New York as their arena, the 2-time scarred swordsmen square off. Only one can survive, and he will wield more power than any man ever dreamed existed. Starring Christopher Lambert, Sean Connery, Highlander is a thrilling saga that rocks the screen with suspense and excitement. Rated R, 110 minutes color. That's pretty cool. I always loved reading the back of video cassettes because they embellish quite a bit. And sometimes it was the artwork on the video cassette that was better than the actual movie itself. Remember those days?
Oh, yeah. Well, especially all the old horror movies and, but yeah, and, growing up in the Midwest, not all the movies made it to our town. So, you'd see videos of stuff that never saw a movie poster for. So
Yeah.
this might have been one that never made it to Des Moines on original release.
It's probably very true. Yeah. So I want to get a little bit of conception here regarding Gregory Widen. Gregory Widen wrote the script for Highlander as a class assignment while he was an undergraduate in the screenwriting program for UCLA. Widen also used Ridley Scott's 1977 film The Duelist as an inspiration for his story. And I'm holding up a Blu-ray copy of a recent release of The Duelist, and I talked to you, Lee, about covering this film in a future episode of Bloody King with more detail. We brought it up before when we were talking about good like sword fighting movies. Remember that?
Oh yeah.
And we briefly touched on this one, but we're going to dive into this one because this is one of the main inspirations for this film, Highlander. So after reading the script, Wyden's instructor advised him to send it to an agent. Wyden sold the script for $200,000. Now it depends on where you read this from, because I also heard $500,000, but I don't know if that was like in pounds or what. But
well, I think that he had a certain amount that also got paid if it went to production.
That makes sense. Yeah, you'll get like a little bump and raise if that happens. So
yeah, because you sell the option for $2, and then you get paid $5 if it ever goes anywhere.
There you go. It became the first draft of what would eventually be a screenplay for the 1986 film Highlander. According to Widen, the idea of the story was basically a combination of a rift on the Duelist. A guy wants to finish a duel over years. And a visit I made both to Scotland and the Tower of London armor display, where I thought, what if you owned all of this? What if you worn it all through history and were giving someone a tour of your life through it? That scene is basically in the movie. According to William Panzer, producer of Highlander, the series, and that's where everything fell into place, the idea, and there are mortals, and they were in conflict with each other, leading secret lives that the rest of us are unaware of. And in a 2006 interview with the Action Elite, Gregory Widen remarked, "I've always been amazed that a project I wrote at a UCLA student has kind of a life of its own. I think its appeal is a uniqueness on how the story was told and the fact that it had heart and a point of view about immortality." Wyden's original draft of the script differed significantly from the film. The initial story was darker, more violent. Conor was born in 1408 rather than 1518. He lives with his mother and father. Heather does not exist. Conor is promised to a girl named Mara who rejects him when she learns that he's immortal. Conor willingly leaves the village. Instead of being banished, his alias is Richard Tupin, and his weapon is a custom broadsword. Ramirez is a Spaniard born in 1100 instead of ancient Egypt, born more than 2,000 years earlier. The Kurgan is known as the Knight, using the alias Carl William Smith. He is not a savage, but a cold-blooded killer. And Brenda is Brenna Cartwright. What do you think of those changes?
I would have liked to have seen this version of the movie. I love the version that we got. But even Clancy Brown is on record as wanting to play the Kurgan as a little bit more refined character. And you start to see that character come through in some of his other roles. Like he has the ability to be refined and intimidating at the same time. So I think that would have been really cool. I think having Ramirez be younger, still almost 1,000 years old, doesn't give quite the scope that having him being ancient Egyptian does.
Right.
So I think that was probably a good thing.
I like the idea, though. I'm glad they added the love story with Heather, though. I think that's important, because it says a lot about Conor's character willing to stay with the woman he loves until she basically grows old and dies.
And that she wasn't fridged.
Yeah.
And that she did kind of keep what happened between her and the Kurgan secret. He only found out about it in 1986. So that motivation wasn't there for Conor his whole life. I think it was a really well done story. I like this version. I like the original version. I wouldn't mind seeing more.
Well, the script went through many changes, through many drafts, but we finally got the one that ended on screen. But I want to go back to when and where you first saw this film. You said it was on video. You had seen Highlander 2 first. So tell me a little bit about watching that video and what impact did it first have on you?
Well, I mean, this would have been the summer of 1992. So I was about to turn 15 or had just turned 15. It was one of those videos that my dad got for me because we were going over to his girlfriend's parents' house, and they just wanted me out of their hair because a 15-year-old kid is going to ruin everything. Parents out there will agree. And I probably watched this movie 2 or 3 times in a row, just dazzled by it. Watching it in the den in a little town called Granger, Iowa, that 5 people have been to and 4 of them still live there. But it, to say it had a profound impact on me is
Understatement.
Yeah, I mean, here we are, grown men talking about this, online for our audience. It did, in much way, and this is also, the dawn of the series, just a couple months later. I wrapped so much of myself around this movie and this series that it's hard to extricate who I've become with, who I might have been if I hadn't seen this. I mean,
Right.
I wore a trench coat to work today. I've got a ponytail. I have a Thunderbird and way too many swords. There is a lot of me that can be linked to this.
So what you're saying is Highlander may have inspired your style.
Yeah, which is good because before that I was a Star Wars fan. And
your lifestyle as well inspired
Yes.
your lifestyle as well.
True enough.
Okay, so for me, it captured me on that video shelf, and I rented it and I loved it. I thought it was great. I didn't get a copy of it though until I think I recorded it off either cable channel or something like that and had it on a VHS thing. And I remember doing having it Highlander and Highlander 2 on the same VHS tape,
Mm-hmm.
doing that for a while. So I want to ask the big question and this is something that Highlander fans, especially in our Blood of Kings group, which we'll get to a little bit later with some great comments that they had about this. And we've dissected Highlander so much, but I always still like to ask the question, what makes this movie different? How does it stand out from others for you, Lee?
I think for me, it's really the visual storytelling. So much of this could be told as a silent movie. And so much of the character is developed through these visible moments. We were talking before this came on, that transition when Mccloud kind of comes up over the hill as he's leaving Eileen Doonan, standing in for Glenn Finnan. You didn't see anything like that before. And it has influenced how movies are made. When we did the sword fighting episode, just the way that sword fights were filmed before this. We're gonna be doing Duelists, and there's some great choreography, but Bill Hobbs, the choreographer on that, wasn't really working with the cameraman, and or the cameraman didn't really know how to set for that. He knew how to set something static and maybe do like a couple dolly shots, but this was experimental and vivacious and insane. And it seems implied in some of the stories that John has that maybe cocaine fueled. But we suddenly have I think Bob Anderson has had better fights, but I don't think he's ever had a better filmed fight. And if it was still influenced by Highlander.
Right. Yeah.
Even Tarantino in Kill Bill Volume 1,
Yep.
There's a segment of the where they're in the House of Falling Leaves fighting the crazy 88s that is directly lifted from Highlander, when the lights go all blue and it's got that big wall behind. That's
right.
That's a tribute to Highlander.
Interesting. Yeah. Those are great points. And when I think of how this movie stands out for me, that makes it different is, first of all, the filming locations. This was a movie that celebrated Scotland and celebrated where these immortals fought to the death, and made it a point to showcase not just their fight amongst these other, but where they were doing it. And it gave you this feel of how long they've been doing it. And that's another thing that fascinated me that makes this movie still stand out. When when we talk about other movies that have touched on immortals, Lee, I know we did a special on last year's movie that came out, The Old Guard with Charlize Theron. I would have to say Highlander is still at the top of any story or movie. Talking about movies here, any movie that has showcased immortals, to me, it's Highlander. But I'll tell you, The Old Guard did a pretty damn good job of also building their own world of immortals and how their rules are, or at least of what we know. When I look back at all the other films about immortals and people that live, obviously you can go to vampire films because vampires are immortal. But to me, vampires are more a fantasy type thing. To me, Highlander's believable. The way that it's shot and the feel for it, and that what they're doing during the daytime is stuff that you and I could be doing. You and I could be at Madison Square Garden going to a wrestling match, not knowing that there's 100-year-old mortals getting ready to square off downstairs. And to me, that's why it's up there beyond any creature feature that has vampires or whatever that have been around for thousands and thousands of years, because this makes it believable. Would you say?
Yeah. Well, and I think I would say they are not supernatural. I think the supernatural happens to them. But I mean, especially Conor, I mean, he's, dude is basically wearing his pajamas through the whole movie. And even when he's in a suit, it looks like jammies.
Yes.
He is the most relaxed protagonist we've ever had, I think, on film, really until Tony Shalhoub in whatchamacallit, Galaxy Quest. But I think the reality that if you stretch out the lifespan of somebody, that this is something that could happen. There's nothing, we get a little bit of more mysticism and crazy in the subsequent movies and then the TV show, of course. But I think that one twist of reality is what makes this really, really interesting.
Yeah, definitely. Now, I want to talk about the posters. We touched on this briefly. This is where the UK and the rest of the world got it right, and the US did not. Because when it comes to and I only have in our notes here, I just put the two more famous ones up there. You get the Highlander hand-drawn art one where you see Conor going through his quickening, and it looks like for years I thought he was holding that sword, but it's actually the Kurgan behind him that's pushing the sword out, and it says there can be only one, and brief synopsis of what's happening at the top of the poster, one of the more famous ones. And then you see like the long wide ones that were released overseas in the UK and stuff. And of course there's been many other posters out there, but I remember doing research on this, that they celebrated this film a lot more. You would see actually Conor in his Scottish garb in posters and in flyers and stuff. And they're celebrating that aspect of it, where over here in the States, all we got was this poster of basically Christopher Lambert looking like a serial killer with just his face in black and white, saying he fought his first battle in the Scottish Highlands in 1536. He will fight to the greatest battle of the streets of New York in 1986. His name is Conor Mccloud. He is immortal. I said it in that monotone voice, Lee, because that's the way it comes across.
Yeah, and I mean, this isn't a good photograph. It gives absolutely no definition to his jawline, so it looks like he has a George Lucas neck.
Yes.
For lack of a better term, I think everyone knows what that means.
Yeah.
I mean, the face, in reading, all the reasons why they cast him, like you can see why you would cast this guy as an immortal, but without the context of knowing the movie,
right?
This doesn't tell me anything. This is, one that, like, why am I going to walk past my local cinema, look at that poster, and choose that movie?
When I look at pictures of just one person's face, like on a poster trying to sell something. There's a few that can pull it off. Maybe Tom Cruise, right? Maybe Charlize Theron. But one of my favorites though is the 40-year-old virgin poster.
Oh yeah, that definitely works.
One of the best. Yeah, it just says everything with Steve Carell.
Yeah, the title, the face,
the goofy smile, and everything. But this poor poster, it's like if I saw this, I'd go. I mean, I don't know. This poster did not help it. But what's funny is I have both these posters.
Of course you do. We're nerds. We can't how many copies of Phantom Menace does every Star Wars nerd have? Right? We have to have it even if we don't like it.
And I still have that VHS, double VHS set too, actually. Yeah. Anyway, back to Highlander here. So, this movie, I would have to say, has coined, when it comes to a tagline and a phrase, there's two big ones. There's "Don't lose your head," and then "There can be only one." Would you say, Lee, that this is probably, I'm going to go top 5 all-time movie quotes, one-liners, taglines? What would you say? I mean, I'm talking about I am your father or do or do not. I'm talking in that realm.
Yeah, I mean, it's really up there with, I am your father. And even then, you have to have so much more, I guess that one, I am your father kind of works with this. But yeah, I mean, the only thing I can come up with that, is even half as culturally relevant is Ezekiel 25:17, and then, I mean, it's a much longer quote that most everybody gets wrong. I think this,
wait, was that, Pulp Fiction?
Pulp Fiction. Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
I think this, if you say, probably more, "There can be only one," or "There can be only one."
Right.
You have, with our cultural zeitgeist and our VHS generation and, all the new viewers that we're finding for this show, I think it really does put people in that mind. I think it does even better than I Am Your Father.
Right.
Because that's more of a cultural phenomenon, just Star Wars, capital letters, than
May
Empire
the Force
Strikes
be with
Back.
you. Yeah. So, I mean, it's also what they say to each other before they start lopping their heads off. Before they begin their duel. It's their way of life, their mantra. Their code, whatever it is, and but unfortunately, it's also painted this. It painted the franchise into a corner,
Yeah.
And then we've questioned on Bloody Kings here. At least I have with Norman, of why can there only be one? And that's something that you and I will have to address as well in the future.
Who told everyone there can be only one?
Exactly. So yeah.
Was it Mythos? Was he just trying to play everybody against each other so that he could be alone?
That's the way he survives.
He's just this guy.
So, what are your favorite scenes or moments from Highlander, the original?
Honestly, that first sword fight in the garage, because that's when the first moment you realize something unusual is going on. Because, I mean, we've all seen sword fighting movies. We grew up on them. But we got some guy with a samurai sword fighting some guy with, what they call a broadsword, but really a rapier, in the parking garage of Madison Square Garden.
Great opening.
And you have to figure out what's going on. Even with, the bathroom speech that Sean Connery gives us, "From the dawn of time we came, passing
from the
silently
dawn
through the
of
ages.
time we came, moving silently down through the centuries." Yes.
Yeah. We're still left trying to figure out exactly what's going on. And I think it's absolutely brilliant. I think the perceived mix of fighting styles, that we actually get to see Peter Diamond on screen without a mask. I think that's amazing because he's the other half of the Bob Anderson team that doesn't get as much love. I think it's really cool that his is the first face we see removed from its head. But I love that. The training montage in Scotland,
Oh yeah,
I think is fantastic. And just the jail scene where Conor has all this attitude, and just with that look, oddly enough, that same weird kind of primal look that he's got in the poster we don't like, he gets that cop to kind of shut up and back off.
Right.
It's like, okay, this is somebody different. Something is wrong with this, and I think that's
all sorts of different places.
Yeah.
That's where I'm from. Take it, cop.
A sword. Yeah.
Yeah. Come on. I love the first main flashback that we get. That's not the kind of not the one where he's at the Madison Square Gardens and he's looking at the wrestling and he's flashing back to a fight, which we see more of later. But I love the Eileen Doone Castle in Scotland there, in Dorney, Scotland, which I've been to. And I'm going to discuss that in another episode with my fiance, Erin, who we took a trip with there and went to as many Highlander locations as we could. One of the most beautiful places you will ever see. And one of the most beautiful, probably in my opinion, the best castle I've ever been to. And the Clan Mccloud coming over that arch of that bridge, and the music behind that, the Michael Kamen music is just absolutely a top-notch scene. And
that swell of it too is just like that music makes that transition so great.
Oh yeah, definitely. But I like the little humorous moments too. I love the scene where Conor goes to Brenda's apartment. And he's like, he knows what she's up to, and I love the fact that she's kind of talking from the kitchen while she's getting stuff ready. And he says, "That's a nice view you got here." And he's opening up the thing and he sees the tape recorder going. And she goes, "What?" And he bends down to the tape recorder going, "It's a nice view you have here." And then he pulls out the gun, and then, he surprises her with her own book, that's the charming scene I like. But
when he just sees the portrait of the Scottish soldier, and he walks in the door, he looks at it, he just kind of like wiggles his eyebrows, like, It's a great moment. Yeah,
it is. And then when you see his inner sanctum of all of his collectibles, like nerds would have, but then you see in the back corner, you find out later that that's Ramirez's feathered outfit that he has there, and he's just got all these great things around, and it's. And the moments with Heather, when they're living together are just great. And having visited that location in person, it's just absolutely gorgeous. The Three Sisters, as they call it there, near Glencoe, Scotland. But I like the fact that there was humor in this. But and then you get the scenes too. There's that market scene where Ramirez is telling, you got to leave Heather. And he's kind of laying some of the rules down and such. And so those are some of my favorites there. What about quotes? We got the obvious ones. There's some other quotes in the film that you really like and that resonate with you, Lee?
I apologize for calling your wife a bloated warthog, and I bid you good day. Can't go wrong with that one. Because, how many times have we all had to use that line?
I just used it the other day. So, yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Why does the sun come up? The stars merely pinholes in the curtain of night. Who knows?
What a great line. Oh, man. It's just that's also telling the audience, don't ask, It's the question you kind of wish they went into with Highlander 2, but it's you just don't ask. It is what it is,
Yeah. There's nuns, no sense of humor. Come on.
Hi, I'm Candy.
Of course you are. And I think, you nailed it on the head with the last scene you referenced, when he's talking about, you must leave her, brother. I was born 2,437 years ago. In that times I've had 3 wives. The last was Shikiko, a Japanese princess. When Shikiko died, I was shattered. It would save you that pain. Please, let her go. So, yes. It's just and we talked a little bit about it on the Sean Connery tribute that we did. You've got that line, and then you've got later on still talking to Heather. He's still able to find joy in life. Well, I introduced myself to the lady that was there. She was most accommodating. He's still a raconteur of sorts, but I just love it.
So, one of the lines in this film or conversations had me curious about a food for 30 years.
Oh, yeah.
And it sounded gross for many years, and I remember seeing pictures of it, but I finally had it and I was like, this is pretty darn good. And that's when Ramirez says, haggis? What is haggis? Conor says, sheep's stomach stuffed with meat and barley. What do you do with it? You eat it. How revolting. I just love that. It's very charming. Very, very charming. Any other lines jump out at you?
There's, just a whole bunch. You have the manners of a goat and you smell of a dung heap and you have no knowledge whatsoever of your potential. Now swear. There's, so many just crazy ones. Like they pop into my head, but to me, this is such a visual movie that I remember the lines, but they don't catch me, I think, the same way as they might in other movies.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's talk about the director real quick here. We got to talk about Russell Mulcahy. He got his chops doing music videos, which is one of the things that the producers were attracted to, and they wanted his style of video making to translate to Highlander. And I got to say, Lee, I think that was the right choice, because the way that he shoots stuff and the way that he does kind of these landscaping shots, I'm not sure all the terminology and such, but director Russell Mulcahy was born in June 1953 in Melbourne, Australia. Fellow Aussie, same hometown as my fiance. And of course, he did music videos for Elton John, Duran Duran, The Buggles, Video Killed the Radio Star, Bonnie Tyler, and many, many more. And, he's done recently, he did Resident Evil Extinction. He's done some television as well. So he's still busy. It's good. But he was known for a video director, and I got to say, it kind of paid off. What do you think?
I completely agree. I think having such a short format to tell a story in, like music video, really does push somebody's creativity. Speaking as somebody that works in film, a lot of times I have 7 to 10 minute films that I'm doing, and like you have to tell a beginning to end story, and you have to set people in a world that, if I had an hour, I might bore you with the details. All of our listeners will know this, but just the ability to do so much in a short amount of time. Because when we think about it, we're talking about a guy that's 400 years old, and we really have he lived in Scotland. And then he stabbed somebody in Boston, or he got stabbed by somebody in Boston. And then in later edits, he was in Nazi Germany or Poland. And nobody ever really comments we didn't really get to see a whole lot of the life. The choices and the way that this is directed, you just get the sense that this is an old man that looks very young, and you get this feeling of his life. And I think the montages that they do, both the training montage and the Heather montage, really are fantastic. The pace of that crazy scene on the freeway.
Yeah.
You just can't beat that. And right. I think at that time, George Lucas could have done it, and music video director.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Let's jump to the cast. I want to mention a couple things here. Director Russell Mulcahy was flipping through a magazine, and he saw a photograph of Christopher Lambert from his recent role as the title hero of Greystoke, The Legend of Tarzan, Lord of the Apes. And at a film festival in 2015, Mulcahy said that he showed the photo to his production staff, and I said, "Who's this?" They had no idea. He couldn't speak English, but he had the perfect look, and he learned English very fast. In preparation, actor Christopher Lambert spent months working with a dialect coach for hours in the morning and sword training with Bob Anderson 4 hours in the afternoon, who had been, of course, the Darth Vader stunt double in the Star Wars franchise. So regarding the cast, this cast is so legendary, I can't really think of replacing anyone for any reason whatsoever. Christopher Lambert has got that really cool look in his eyes. Part of it might have to do with the fact that he's going blind, and he has to wear glasses when he's practicing. And, that's he's talked about that and stuff like that. But when I'm looking at the cast here with, Christopher Lambert, Roxanne Hart, Clancy Brown, Sean Connery, B. Edney, Alan North, Sheila Gish, John Polito, Hugh Quarshie, Christopher Malcolm as Kurt, and of course we got Peter Diamond as Fazil. I mean, we can go on and on. James Cosmo as Angus McLeod, a legendary actor. I can't imagine seeing anyone else, and everyone was freaking great.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a perfect storm of casting, and even like what I would consider, some of the weakest links. As I was kind of going through in my head when you asked the question, it's still like Roxanne Hart brought a realism to that character that you wouldn't necessarily get from a different actress. They would either play tough as nails or damsel in distress. And this character kind of had to be both. I mean, she is tough as nails, but she has to deal with something completely outside of what she has accepted
and her
as reality.
Expertise in that era made her even more cool and more fun. She was kind of like a female Indiana Jones in a way, the way she would, and always want to be up, like she complained that, she didn't get called to the murder scene as fast as everyone else did and stuff like that. So, yeah. Yeah.
And just great appeal. I think that you got a man that's been around for a long time. He knows what he wants, and, a smart woman that could theoretically understand his world. Being a historian, metallurgist, and, just a fan of the period, I think that'd be the right kind of girl to hang out with for a few decades.
Definitely. So the movie itself, we had a runtime of an hour and 56 minutes. As I mentioned at the top of the show, it was released in the U.S. March 7th, 1986. I believe it had its premiere for a one-time only event at a film festival somewhere in France, though I think in June, or I think it was January, but released theatrically for the first time in the U.S. on March 7th. Had a budget of around 16 to 19 million, worldwide gross of about 12.9, so it failed at the box office, but I think it did quite well on video. Filming was between April 85 and August 1985. When it came to critical response, not always good, but there was some. When it comes to its initial release, Highlander was not received well, but it gained wide and persistent popularity in Europe and other markets, as well as on home video. It has since become a cult hit in both domestic and non-domestic markets, leading to 4 sequels, a television series, and various other spin-offs. Rotten Tomatoes. The film has an approval rating of 69% based on 36 reviews with an average rating of 6.3 out of 10. The site's critical consensus reads, people hate Highlander because it's cheesy, bombastic, and absurd. And people love it for the same reasons. This surprised me because I'm a huge fan of Leonard Maltin. He says he gave the film 1.5 stars. And he says, quote, interesting premise made silly and boring. Former rock video director Mckay's relentless showy camera moves may cause you to reach for Dramamine. Ouch! Leonard Maltin. Oh my God.
Well, I think when you have like the only, cinematic comparison we can really make is a Spielberg or a George Lucas at this point.
Right.
Because nobody was being this crazy with the camera. And even then, George Lucas was more controlled and it was done in a sci-fi medium. But I don't think he was ready for film to start moving in this direction.
That's a good point. And he's one of the most revered, critics out there. And he always was fair. Where you would get, Ebert, Roger Ebert and
Gene Siskel?
Yeah, Gene Siskel, where they would kind of be on the same fence, and then very rarely they would, one would like it, one would not. But when they were harsh, they were harsh. But Leonard he would be harsh, but he wouldn't be like mean about it, like they would tend to be. So I thought that was interesting. Alex Stewart reviewed the British release print of Highlander for White Dwarf and stated that Highlander is visually stunning, from the timeless grandeur of the Scottish landscape to the surreal urban jungles of New York, and the sword fights are terrific. And Danielle Griffin of Film as Art awarded the film 4 out of 4 stars, saying the key to Highlander's success is in its approach to its subject matter. What could have been a premise that breathes cliche is given a fresh approach due to Mulcahy's unique directing style and cleverly written script. Highlander is certainly a classic film that will continue to be cherished and watched as the world of movie making continues to grow and change. It is a triumph example of art of cinema, and watching it remind us why we are going to the movies in the first place. I think we need to get this Danielle Griffin person as a guest here, because they get it.
Yeah. And it takes a lot to kind of move yourself out of, when you're in a film critic mindset, you're always judging everything against, Citizen Kane or something like that. And to judge something based on its own merits and look at it, especially like for us, going back and looking at, okay, what was the world like in 1986?
Yeah.
We talked about, Top Gun came out this year. The amount of work they had to do to have as impressive a camera work in that, they had to hire the Navy to blow this one out of the water in terms of impressive camera work.
This is true. I want to touch on the video releases briefly. We had done a whole podcast about it. Of course, we mentioned it with our friend here, Mr. Highlander author Jonathan Melville, as I hold up his book again there. Make sure you check that out. A Kind of Magic, Making of the Original Highlander. But I just want to briefly sum it up here. As roughly 8 minutes of footage was cut from the film for its U.S. theatrical release. Most of the cuts were sequences involving significantly European brand of humor, which the distributors thought American audiences would not find funny, such as Conor being repeatedly headbutted by one of his Klansmen, the Duelist shooting his assistant, and the Kurgan licking the priest's hand. I'm sorry, but all of those are awesome, and I get them.
Yeah, I think the Duelist shooting his assistant, like it doesn't make sense because we don't really have a reason for him to do that. It's just kind of like this funny button on a scene.
That's hilarious. I love it.
That really, like, if you have, like, I apologize for calling your wife a bloated warthog and I bid you good day, that's a pretty good button for the scene. Transfer back to that. It almost has a Monty Python characteristic to it. But the other part, and I mentioned this when we did the video release episode, I wish they would have kept the part with Reitzel out, because it's the only time that Conor Mccloud acts as a hero.
Okay, so hold on a second here. So that is one of the scenes here. They said the cut Mulcahy found most objectionable was the deletion of the scene showing how Conor met Reitzel, because he could see no reason for its removal and believed that the relationship between Conor and Reitzel was incomprehensible without it. And this is the famous World War II scene where he saves her from the Nazi. Nazi shoots him and he's protecting the girl, but he wakes up, gets the Nazi's gun and shoots him, saying, "You're the master race." Are you saying you think they should have left that scene out?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, and I think it's mostly because without that scene, we have Conor Mccloud as just a guy. Kind of like we were mentioning, like, this is just the stretch of time. He's never a hero anywhere else in this movie.
That's a good point. I see your point. But you really have a heavy and emotional attachment to how he feels about Reitzel. And I think that's important. And in the recent comic book series that came out, which that was fantastic. Which touched on the relationship even more, which I thought was good. But I'm sorry, but I'm a fan of anyone shooting Nazis. So.
Oh yeah,
but that scene was cut out of the VHS release that we first got, or at least maybe the broadcast television version that I remember seeing. I was like, because when I finally saw this uncut version, I'm like, oh my God, he shot a Nazi. That's awesome. That's how we met, So, but I see your point though. You want to see him be the hero at the end because he's kind of this guy that's kind of skating through his immortality and trying to not necessarily seek out other mortals to play the game,
Yeah, and like he never goes back to Glenfinnan to get revenge. We never see him try to be a hero really anywhere else. There was that scene that they never filmed with Napoleon, where non-heroic. The duel on Boston Common, he loses and he's drunk and he's being rude. He's just a guy.
Yeah.
To have this heroic moment. And I think that. Well, yes, it does explain the relationship with Reitzel. I think Sheila Gish in her scene or her two scenes really does show the depth of caring that she has for him.
Yeah.
And I think she does a really good job. And I also just personally, I don't think that scene matches visually with the rest of the movie, whether it's the transition that they make or the color palette. There's something about it that looks like those scenes that they added to Highlander 2 that were filmed 5 years later. It just doesn't seem like it was meant to be there or it wasn't edited in properly. But
interesting.
That's the film nerd in me.
Interesting point. I appreciate that. Very cool. So, one thing that we talk about when we cover movies on Couch Potato Theater, our other podcast on the Fandom Podcast Network, talking about our favorite films. One of the things we talk about is the cars and the vehicles and stuff like that. And we actually did a podcast with you, Lee, back in, I think, 120 something or whatever it was.
I think it was 1 in 26.
Yeah, where we actually talked about the cars of Highlander from the TV series through the movie as well. So we invite you to go back and listen to that. That was a great conversation. You yourself have a T-Bird, which is inspired from Duncan McLeod's T-Bird from the television series. So I'm very jealous of that. Of course, let's just be honest, that's the only car you could fit into, right?
Pretty much, yeah. And don't be jealous of the maintenance fees that I have to pay on that thing because, Adrian talks about what a pain in the butt that thing was to use in the 90s. This is the 2020s. What I have to pay just to get this thing out of the garage every year when I want to drive it for a couple days every month in the summer. I don't know why I do it until I turn the key and then it's like, oh,
but it just looks so darn cool.
Yeah.
One of the most important components of the Highlander movie is the soundtrack and the music. Music by Michael Kamen. The original Highlander orchestra score was composed by Michael Kamen. The British rock band Marillion, Marilion, turned down the chance to record the soundtrack because they were on a world tour. A missed opportunity which guitarist Steve Rothery later said he regretted. The band's Scottish lead singer Fish had also accepted a part in the film but pulled out because of the scheduling conflict. Bummer. David Bowie, Sting, Duran Duran were considered to do the soundtrack for the film. The eventual soundtrack, of course, includes several songs by Queen, such as A Kind of Magic, Princes of the Universe, the latter also being used for the Highlander TV series title sequence. Brian May was inspired to write Who Wants to Live Forever after watching the love scenes between Conor and his wife Heather, and the song ultimately accompanied on the film. Now, you also bought a copy of A Kind of Magic, Making of the Original Highlander by Jonathan Melville, and he interviews Brian May and talks about that.
Yeah, and it's absolutely fantastic. I read it twice for the review or for the episode that we did, and I've read it a couple times since then. It's just an amazing series of stories, but hearing how Brian May came up with the concept, I think he was driving along in his car.
Yeah.
And pretty much ironed it out in about 15 minutes and then put it to recording and then found all the ways to get it done. It's fascinating seeing that or hearing that story. Because, you and I try to write that down. You play guitar, I play guitar poorly. We could write that in maybe a few years and come up with the idea. This guy, he's Brian May, one of the best to ever pick a string. And just to come up with that. But as soon as you said Duran Duran was considered for the soundtrack, all I can hear in my head now is, his name is Conor and he runs upon the sand. Like that's in my head now.
You went there, didn't you?
I did.
That's awesome.
And he feels hungry like the stag.
Yeah,
Hungry
like the stag. There you go. Well
yeah.
said. One of the, as we touched on before, one of the most important things in addition to the music is the filming locations. And actually, about a Scottish Highlander being filmed in Scotland was the smartest thing to do. And as I mentioned, Scotland's Islandune Castle and its bridge featured prominently in the film. Now, the budget was put up by Thorn EMI, the company, and when brought to Russell Mulcahy, the title was originally called The Dark Knight.
I need this crossover movie right now. Batman versus Conor. Why haven't we made this movie yet?
I know. I mean, The Dark Knight, man. That's what it was originally called. There you go. So, yeah.
The Dark Knight Never Dies.
There was another title, and we're going to jump into trivia right now. The original title was Shadow Clan. Another title here. That's interesting. Now that also I assume he's referring to the clan of immortals, that they're the Shadow Clan. You think that's maybe what they meant?
Yeah. And I think that's possibly a more intriguing title than Highlander.
Yeah.
Especially now, because if I say Highlander, people are thinking a mid-size SUV.
This is true, especially when you search on Google. Yes.
Yeah. Or you get the ladies thinking about that other TV show about the atemporal Scottish warriors.
Outlander. Yes.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yes. Yeah. Definitely. Let's not get those confused. Yeah.
Exactly. The one with the dreamboat and the kilt. Yeah.
Real quick regarding the filming locations, I forgot to mention that one of the other impressive, besides going to Glencoe and all that kind of stuff, was the actual church holy ground scene where Conor and Kurgan unite after many, many years. And that was actually, even though it's supposed to take place in New York, it's actually filmed outside of London, and it's still there. It's still in service. It's absolutely gorgeous. And when Aaron and I arrived there, it was just perfect. It was in between, I guess, services, and this wonderful light was coming through the stained glass window. It was just absolutely awesome. And we're going to touch on the Highlander filming locations in an upcoming episode. I'm going to have Aaron back on, and we're going to basically relive that tour of Scotland, of all of the Highlander locations that we tried to visit and did visit. So yeah, originally the Shadow Clan, the opening shot sweeping through the stadium was accomplished using a computerized system that held the camera on 4 wires. The system was invented. It was basically the inventor of the Steadicam, stabilizing the camera system, by Garrett Brown. And this gave the appearance of filming from a helicopter. Russell Mulcahy did in fact use the sound of a helicopter blades in the background to enhance this illusion. But this is now used all the time during major football sports now. Every single and it's great because it gives you a bird's eye view of, like, when the team's in a huddle or doing something cool like that. And it's used for other things as well. But I remember that scene jumping out at me like, how the hell are they filming this? Is there a guy holding a handheld camera on a wire sliding across, Madison Square Garden?
Yeah. And I would think I was too young to actually wonder how that was done. I think I probably said, wow. And that was kind of the end of it. But I mean, you think of it now, I mean, you're talking about football, how perfect it is for that. Cause I mean, when you and I were growing up, it was those giant, looked like artillery piece cameras that had to be in the right place to, capture all the action on the field. And now, we can get it from every angle with these cameras. And again, this has affected cinema and how we look at things.
So some what if casting here. Kurt Russell was originally cast as Conor Mccloud, but he pulled out of the project at the persistence of his girlfriend, Goldie Hawn. He instead starred in some tiny indie film called Big Trouble in Little China. Also came out in 1986.
Now, I'm glad that he made Big Trouble in Little China. I still would have loved to have seen his take on Conor Mccloud, especially if he just did the Jack Burton voice. I'm just a Conor Mccloud of the Clan McLeod. I was born in Glenfinnan on the shores of Loch Shiel, and I cannot die. That's the movie I want to see now.
Stop! No! It's funny. Rutger
Where are you from? Lots of different places.
Lots of different places. Rutger Hauer and Nick Nolte were considered for the role of the Kurgan.
I would have loved to have seen Rutger Hauer. As much as I love Clancy Brown, Rutger Hauer had a pre-existing skill set with swordsmanship. Especially like if you go and watch Lady Hawk, I mean, he is just artful with a blade.
And he looks badass in that movie too. That black leather and all that cool stuff. Yeah, he looks really cool. Yeah.
Two of the best sword fights ever put to film too. Also, Bill Hobbs, who did the Duelists and was the trainer of our good friend F. Mckay.
That's right. Yeah. Hey, did you know this? The quickening is a term for when a baby in the womb shows its first sign of life, its first noticeable movement within the womb.
That I did know, but I was one of the preacher's grandkids, so
now this is interesting.
Extraneous knowledge.
This is interesting here. According to the DVD commentary, the film's climax was originally intended to take place on top of the Statue of Liberty, when it was changed to an amusement park, and then it changed to the rooftop of the Silver Cup Studios building. The opening sequence was originally intended to take place during the National Hockey League game, but the NHL refused because the film crew intended to emphasize the violence of the match. Back to the Statue of Liberty, we interviewed Edwin Itzy Atkins, who was the New York location manager that helped out with the location shots. And what did he talk about using that little bit of grease?
Street grease.
Street
grease.
A lot of
50s.
to help pay some unions and stuff like that. But there was a reason why they could not do the Statue of Liberty. Because at this time, they were refurbishing the Statue of Liberty, and they put up all of those gang planks around the Statue of Liberty. Yep. And there was only one filming location, or one film was allowed to film there, or at least parts of it, and that was Remo Williams' The Adventure Begins, because the entire major fight scene at the end takes place on those things, what do you call it, the rafters, I guess.
My brain just went empty.
I forget the actual terminology, but that's when the actual Statue of Liberty was being cleaned up and refurbished, and it wasn't very attractive at the time because you had all those planks around it, scaffolding. Thank you. Scaffolding. But Remo Williams, The Adventure Begins, starring Fred Ward, was able to film part of it there, and then they recreated the top part of it, the soundstage somewhere else. So that's why that was out.
And I am so glad I decided to nerd out a little bit on that movie, because that was one of my favorites as a kid, my dad's favorite. And I'm like, got any great stories? He's like, well, I can tell you how we got that in location. I'm like, yes, I want.
And we interviewed Edwin Itzy Atkins, so make sure you guys go check that out. So while filming the scene at Eileen Doon Castle, the car park by the castle had to be covered up by tons of peat to disguise it. The house located by the bridge out to the castle was boxed in with hardboard and painted over so that it looked like even real stone when you stood right next to it. Extras were paid £25 a day with a £10 bonus if they took their own horses. A lot of the locals took several days off to work to do it. Let me see here. Christopher Lambert claims to have only seen this movie once at its premiere. I don't know how old that trivia is, but I'm going to guess that's not true since 2016 when he was invited to the premiere of the 4K one. So I'm assuming this is older trivia, but the fact that he had not seen it maybe since then, I could believe that, I guess.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. Let's see here. Oh, this is interesting. Russell Mulcahy said that the biggest dilemma of this movie was the visualization of the prize, I guess, aka the quickening. He said, not knowing what to do, we did what we did. A combination of lighting effects and animation was used. The electricity was seen to cover the wires holding up Christopher Lambert. You can still see them, by the way. Mm-hmm. And the animation representing the dynamic souls of the past and all the immortals who have gone before him. A very cool quickening scene, actually. But yeah, it's like, what do you do with this? I mean, how do you do this prize thing? Because this quickening is supposed, at the time of this filming, Lee, This quickening was supposed to have been different from all of the other quickenings because this is supposed to have been the final 2 immortals, so it had to be special. And that's why we saw the demons and why they did something a little bit different with it. But if they were supposed to be the final 2, which of course we found out later that's not the case, but it had to stand out a little bit.
Well, I think to me, the deleted quickening from Highlander 2 at the end would have maybe made a little bit more sense in this context, where like now he has powers of a sort where he kind of like flies and can disappear and reappear.
Right. Yeah.
I think that would be maybe a little bit, because like at the end of this is like, okay, I'm just a dude in an LL Bean ad eating a picnic in the countryside with my lady. There's not really a payoff to him getting the quickening. So.
Speaking of the ending, and I'm going to ask you a question at the end of this podcast that I also posted to the members of Blood of Kings. The ending of the novelization is also expanded by revealing that Conor went back to his antique shop to say his final goodbye to Reitzel before leaving for Scotland. Once he and Brenda arrive in Scotland, they tour for 2 months and then open an antique shop in Camden Alley. On one occasion, he returns to the Scottish uplands alone and stares at the remnants of his home with Heather. There's no croft there, but he finds a few stones from the fallen tour and locates the burial place of Ramirez and Heather. He finds 2 timbers and fashions a crude cross, telling Heather that she would like Brenda because she is much like you. Pretty cool. I kind of like that. Yeah. But don't let that eschew your answer at the end that I'm going to ask you. So okay.
I will say though, I think the way that they ended 3, with him driving past and the Mccloud sword is still stuck in the ground, I kind of like that.
Yeah,
as a way to do it.
Yeah, it is cool. It is cool,
especially with like that final zap of lightning into the sword. Like, ooh.
Yeah.
That would have like set up like, okay, there's something still going on.
Yeah.
Instead of just like a sudden cut and dry ending.
Maybe that was kind of their like, maybe the story isn't done being told yet. Maybe. I just kind of considered that. So obviously we have sequels and there's lots of Highlander merchandise, but we've talked about that just recently in a couple podcasts. We'll touch on the sequels and obviously we cover the TV series as well. But I wanted to get into the Immortal Buzz segment right now because I posted a question saying on Highlander on Blood of Kings post on, yesterday on February 9th. I said, we want your comments below. The original Highlander 1986 is celebrating its 35th anniversary on March 7th. 2021. Lee and I will be celebrating this anniversary with several podcasts coming soon. This week, we will be recording the first podcast, the one that we're actually doing right now. And we want to basically know what your comments were and how and when you first saw Highlander and what kind of impact it had on you. But I threw this new question, Lee, that I'm going to be asking you in a little bit out to the Blood of Kings members here. And it's a new question I've added to the Couch Potato Theater at the end. Okay. A what if.
Yeah.
For fun, we would like you to answer our 5x5 question. What happens at the end of Highlander? You choose. Now I said, don't worry about what the sequels have shown us. Have fun and choose what you have liked to have seen. And I said, choose either what happens 5 seconds after the movie ends, 5 minutes, 5 weeks, 5 months, or 5 years after the original movie ends. So think about that, Lee. Marinate on that while I read some of the comments here. Our friend Michael Shipwreck Logan said, at the end of the first Highlander, long before Adrian introduced us to Duncan, I felt that Mac had gained knowledge of every living being on Earth, feeling basically what the planet as a whole could experience. About an hour after the prize earned, he would have been granted an ability he had not been able to do, and that's being granted having children, since now he was starting to become mortal and could finally grow up old and such with a woman he had found love again. Jeremy Orr said, 1987, I was 12 years old and my family was visiting my mom's best friend. To keep me and my brother occupied, she offered us a choice between VHS 2 movies, Nomads. I remember that. Wasn't that also, was who was in that?
I
Nomads.
don't know that I've ever seen that one.
I will say that, isn't that a Christopher Lambert film? I thought. Anyway, can't remember. No, he says here, Nomads, starring the guy I only knew as Remington Steele, and one other guy holding a sword in a parking garage. I knew nothing about either film, but the man with the sword sparked my curiosity. That one little choice ended up defining much of my life going forward. Of course, Jeremy has done, of course, a fan film as well for Highlander. As by the 5x5 question, to diverge from what has been done, I'd like to imagine that 5 months or so later, Conor senses the first of a need line of immortals coming into the world. The game is their own, as his has concluded. But time moves in cycles, and the game has begun anew. That's interesting. So he's mortal now, but there's new immortals afoot. What do you think? I like that.
Yeah. I think that would be interesting, and that could be how the next generation finds out that they have to kill each other.
Yeah.
In the end, there could be only one.
Michael Shipwreck says his 5x5 is Conor now one win. Okay, Conor now one winner of the prize can sense new upcoming immortals, but he is no longer one of the contestants. But he can, however, explain the rules of the game to them, which would take place around Duncan's era, years after the original story. That's cool. I like that. Our buddy Adam P. O'Brien, of course, the host of Lethal Mullet, our show here on the Fandom Podcast Network. He also has his own network now, the Lethal Mullet Network, talking about 80s and 90s action films. Says that is like the hardest question a fan and as a movie lover is the answer is how to do a sequel to one of the most fun and amazing time-bending movies out about immortality, swordplay, and great characters. I think the easiest way is to literally have another continuation and definitely not try to do the whole explaining where everything comes from, but show different parts of what can threaten the immortal. We only know some of the lore by the time of the first film. So instead of Zeist, it should have been this sort of thing that happens in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, where we have a prequel part of it to what should have been about the Kurgan and Ramirez. From well before the show, some of the backstory that may inform your parts by the law by the time we get past the end of Highlander. That's one thing that should never really be as it is, where do the immortals come from, and just expand the lore and the fact that there are different rules. That's one of the common things too. I like that about not necessarily having to explain things that where the immortals come from, which is one of the biggest contentions of Highlander 2 is don't show us Zeist. We don't need to know, right?
Yeah, and I do like him taking this chance to go back in the past. You know, we talked about several times really of with the new movie or series coming out, like how do we do it? And I do like the idea of the story between Kurgan and Ramirez, as well as, you know, other characters that we've met through the movies and series. I think that is probably the more interesting way to go. And, you know, I mean, we had a lot of fans when we did the prequel series of Star Wars. Right. We already know how it ends, so what are the stakes? Right. Well, you know, you watch that story and, you know, despite some interesting choices in terms of editing and acting, you do see a progression of how it came to be, and there are still those moments where you want it to be different and it's not. Yeah. Same thing with Cobra Kai. Right. You know that they're enemies and you know how they end up that way, and you want it to be different. And I think that's good tragedy. Yeah. Because we haven't had a real tragedy or tragic Highlander. And I think like the tragedy of Darth Kurgan the Wise would be an interesting one. It would
define tragedy in Highlander though, because you'll get fans saying that Highlander 2 and the source for tragedies. So,
but I think those are more travesties.
I think I know. Yeah, travesty. There you go. I understand where you're coming from. So yeah. Andrew Modine says, I guess whether it's 5 months or 5 years later, the only real worthwhile place to go to with a true sequel would be exploring Conor's use of the prize. Like he tries to do things like using the omniscience to bring about nuclear disarmament and peace to the Middle East. But a lot of people just aren't having it from him, and he kind of becomes a joke. By some hurdle, he's able to achieve something big for the world, though not a dumb shield, of course, referring to Highlander 2. But I think this is interesting because then Jill Burdicus jumps in and says, Then we have, let's see here. We also got Andrew Modine says, except looking through the 2021 lens, we never needed Conor and his shield. That was a fantasy. We cleaned up our act, and the ozone layer was relatively okay with okay of all of our own. So it would not be that what could have been omniscience. Conor due for the world, they say 1990. With what was going on at the time, the conflicts, and somehow we'd still have to have sword fights. Maybe introduce the idea that immortal have a cousin race with a different, maybe contrary objective, playing a different game. That's interesting. But this is their conversation with Jill and Andrew goes on. It's interesting here because Jill says, or Conor creates other immortals innocent until someone discovers quickenings. And then Andrew says, oh, like Conor realizes it's his duty after helping mankind in some way, completing the final duties of the existing game to create the next game and start seeding new immortals, thus giving some insight on how this has always worked out. That's interesting.
So does that make him the Guardian?
Ooh, interesting. You had to go to the source, didn't you?
I have to find a way to ruin things. That's just what I do. I'm nature's ruiner.
That's funny. So Stevie Mccloud, my friend there in Glasgow, Scotland, he says he hired it on VHS, otherwise saying renting, from a mobile video shop that used to come around my area. And so the McClouds crossed the bridge out of the castle. I was hooked. Then he says, later on, I met a guy whose enthusiasm and love for the movie rekindled my interest in it again. Then he met a girl who shared his passion, and then I met her. So it's a very special movie to me now. I wonder who he's talking about. Love you, Stevie. After the movie ended, I believe Conor would have traveled the stars, continuing his journey through history, Martian colony wars, attack ships on fire off the shoulder of Orion, etc. I like where he's going with that.
I had not thought of this as part of the Blade Runner universe, but Stevie, I think you got a good idea there, buddy. That's
funny.
That's how we get Rutger Hauer in as an immortal.
Exactly.
Instead of extremely mortal.
Colleen Best had a wonderful memory to share regarding seeing Highlander. This is awesome. I was living in Sun Valley, Idaho, when the local movie theater showed the trailer and announced that there would be a special screening of the film the next week, followed by a Q&A with one of the producers called Bill Panzer. I put in my time at work because I was a big Sean Connery fan. Mr. Panzer was interested in our response to his movie. I let him know that I came to see the film because of Sean and wished that we could have learned more about the backgrounds of the other immortals of the film. I also let him know that I didn't appreciate the way the lead female went from being a smart, fearless woman to one whimpering in a car. My friends and I let him know that the women who lived alone in the big city would have taken self-defense classes to protect ourselves. That's awesome. We would not have been whimpering during the car ride with the Kurgan. We would have been fighting back or trying to crash the car to escape. We also told him that it was too bad they made Conor the last immortal. All that history from the immortals living among us was never explored. Mr. Panzer asked us for our contact information. We kept getting promotional material for the movie and then for the new series. That's awesome. As for the 5 questions, I always believe that the best way to have kept the franchise going would have been for Conor to realize 5 minutes into Kurgan's quickening that the game was still going on. I thought this was really cool, Lee, that as he's getting quickening, electrocuted or whatever, it's like, wait a minute, this ain't over.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's probably, if they had done just like a little thing in like episode 1 of the series, that could have like rectified and stopped all of the arguments and postulations and confused comments that we get on our page and over on Highlander Heart, and Andy Sloan could rest peacefully at night because he wouldn't have to answer all the questions.
Well said.
But he's the hero we deserve. He's the hero we need right now. A Dark Knight.
Well said. Colleen goes on to say, it wasn't the final battle because there were immortals still out there. Each time an immortal was beheaded and no immortal was close enough to receive the quickening, their souls were sent back into the world to begin again. Some as newborns, some as newborns, some as newly awakened immortals. To me, the game never ends. but just has different players because there will always be a battle between good and evil to maintain the balance in the universe. I love the different series and the way the franchises explored the lives of so many new immortals. The producers were smart to start interacting with the fans from the beginning by answering questions and chatting with them on the new internet. We were rewarded with conventions and perks from the merchandise store. The fans are still loyal and keep introducing new fans to the online discussion groups. It is such fun when those new fans realize that the cast and crew post as well and know many of us by name. Man, that is really cool. Well, well said, Colleen. I appreciate that. Now, this is interesting. Gary Lewis saw the movie in Leicester Square in London on a Saturday afternoon and was wowed by it. It helped being a Queen fan. Then followed this up by watching Aliens at the enormous Odeon Cinema about 50 yards away. What a great double feature to see in the same day.
And I've been there. I actually saw the premiere of Shanghai Nights, like the world premiere of Shanghai Nights at the Odeon. That must have been 2003. I want to say March, but yeah, that even now that's still a pretty darn big screen. And it's really cool walking out of that movie and going to see Big Ben and realizing, oh yeah, that's right there.
I got to see the 30th anniversary of Aliens there near Leicester Square when I was with Aaron and in London, and that was really, really cool. And then a couple of years later, when we returned, we saw Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark. So that was a lot of fun. So we got let's wrap things up here. I got some questions for you as we wrap this up here as part 1 of Blood of Kings Highlander, celebrating the 1986 original film Highlander, 35 years. I know we've critiqued many, many things about Highlander, but do you have any critiques about this movie? What do you think would have made it a better film?
I think something in between Scotland and New York that was a little bit more substantive, including an interaction between Conor and the Kurgan, because they really meet in 1536, and then Kurgan kind of shows up and wrecks some stuff, and then shows up again in 1986. There's not a
so something a little more true to the Duelist film that that inspired Gregory Widen, that they did meet up more than once. That would be that's a good point.
At least one more. Animosity. And I'd say what Colleen said, about Brenda's character, while I do believe that anyone being held captive by a barbarian is going to be terrified, I do see her point that she goes from really being the driving force behind the modern story to, once she finds out what Conor is, she's there for sex and romance, and find a way to have her character be a bit more useful in the entire plot, not just in kind of our view. I think would be a better way. More, I think, along the lines of the character Randy McFarland that we have in season 1, who I thought was underused. But I think those are the two things that I'd probably change the most.
What's missing is a female immortal. That's what's missing here. We needed a strong female immortal to also have been part of this game, or at least maybe a romantic. Maybe Heather could have been that female immortal to a certain degree. I think that's one of the things I would have done, and I wouldn't have painted the story into a corner of there can be only one. I would have liked to have seen something at the end of no, hold on so fast. I would have made that, that option to keep a tiny door open. It's still a great movie by itself, and it's wonderful, but I would have done that. Not much anything else I would have changed. I mean, everything in music, direction, the cast, everything else is good, but I would have made a strong female immortal be part of it. I think that would have been cool. Because it's all guys, that are doing this. And so that's what I would have done personally.
Well, and what if Facile had been female?
Yeah.
That would have really set like a completely different standpoint, especially if it's still a really good fight.
Yeah.
I'd still say that's the best fight in the movie.
Yeah. I agree.
And if suddenly you've got a man fighting a woman in a parking garage with swords, no idea what's going on. Like, you have to get dropped in and figure all this out, and then you get a backstory with them, and her killing Heather or doing something to Heather at that point would have definitely been an interesting plot development. But yeah, I think all of my changes were already made into the series.
Yeah, good point. Yeah. So, I was going to ask you to give your final thoughts, basically, on this film and where it stands with you. But we do a podcast about Highlander, so we kind of know where that is. So we're gonna jump to the 5x5 question that I presented to the Bloody Kings members, and got some great answers. So I want to ask you, Lee, what is your answer to the 5x5 question? What happens next at the end of Highlander? Keep in mind, don't worry about what the sequels have told us. This is what you would have liked to have seen. What happens either 5 seconds, 5 minutes, 5 weeks, 5 months, or 5 years after the movie ends? Pick one.
I'm going to take 5 years, and I'm going to make a slight edit to the end of the movie. He's not mortal at the end. I want him to try to figure out how to actually use all of this knowledge to change the world. Because now he is, he theoretically has, counter evidence to the Bible, or to, all the people that are in his head have witnessed history, and he can change things. He can give people inspiration. He can take hope away. He can change, imagine if he had proof that, Jesus was an immortal and not, the Son of God. Like, imagine knowing that and being able to take that away. Him dealing with the truth, I think, would be a fascinating thing. It would take him away from sword fighting, which is, honestly what we want all of this. But from a character standpoint, what do you do with all that information? You don't just have a kid. And I don't know that it's established that he killed any scientists that would have been able to build the shield, so I don't know. But I think him trying to do something to make the world a better place was a great idea for Highlander 2 that just didn't pay off. But that's what I'd like to see, is him as like this wandering philosopher, Kwai Chang Caine kind of character that has a functioning morality and knowledge base, but doesn't know how to apply it to the world, and finding little places to do it. That's where I'd like to see it go.
Interesting. I like that. I like that a lot. I've been kind of going back and forth. I've been thinking about, how do I continue this so it doesn't, they don't do the paint yourself into a corner thing. And so I'm going to do 5 seconds after the movie ends. This is what we get.
All right.
We hear a little honk honk. He looks down and he sees a little cab open up. Now walks Ernest Borgnine. And he goes, "McCloud, the game is not ended yet, sir." And that's where it ends.
Ernest Borgnine?
Ernest Borgnine, yep. And he gets out of a cab.
Okay.
I don't know why
where to go with that, but I like that sets up like what's going on.
That's a little throwback, by the way, to him playing cabbie in Escape from New York.
Okay.
But yeah. I like the idea of him Connor having this romantic little moment in the Highlands, with Brenda, and then all of a sudden someone just jumps out of a car or maybe walks up the mountain going. And I like the idea of it being an older looking guy, not necessarily like a young guy, not necessarily someone that's looking like he's trying to take his head,
Mm-hmm.
But he's letting him know it's not over yet, just something. And I just threw out Ernest Borgnine because that would just be like the weirdest thing, but I want him to have a New York thick accent though. I think that's important. So there's a tie to where, supposedly the game ended. And I would just like someone to kind of come up and say, it's not over, man, or either, retconning the fact that maybe he's not immortal, maybe he's a watcher, maybe he knows what's going on, but also too, you remember this film didn't really have the immortal buzz. It was added in a little bit later in other releases of the film.
Yeah.
But it would have been nice if there was something to let Conor know that it's not over yet and other people know about this, so.
When you said somebody steps out of the taxi, all I was thinking was Christopher Lloyd popping out. Oh, Conor, we have to go back to the past.
That's funny. Well, this has been a lot of fun, Lee, looking back on this film and talking about it. We really haven't done this movie, but you and I, since you joined us, it's been a year now since you've been my co-host of Bloody Kings, man. And
what a crazy ride it's been, brother.
Yeah. So it's been fun talking about Bloody Kings, or talking Highlander here on Bloody Kings, and we got a lot more stuff we're going to be doing celebrating the original Highlander and the 35 years of Highlander this year, and we're going to be doing this on Bloody Kings, and in addition to other topics as well. Last episode, we've been having a little fun, of course, where we decided to celebrate actors that were on the Highlander TV series more than once as different characters. And we talked about Dustin Nguyen in Road Not Taken. And before that, we started off the new year talking about the episode Revenge is Sweet, celebrating a happy Highlander New Year. So that was a lot of fun. Make sure you go back and check that out. We got some more fun episodes coming up as well. But I want to let you know how you can get a hold of us here on the Fandom Podcast Network and, of course, Bloody Kings. Please head to YouTube and search Fandom Podcast Network and subscribe. And all of the audio podcasts like Bloody Kings and our other shows on the network will also be put on there as well. And we have exclusive YouTube programming as well on there. So make sure you check that out. Our master feed for all of our audio podcasts, including Bloody Kings, can be found at fpnet.podbean.com. Fandom Podcast Network is on all major podcast platforms, Apple Podcast, iTunes. You can reach Bloody Kings on Twitter and Instagram at Bloody Kings Pod. Please also, if you're listening to this and you're not part of the Bloody Kings Highlander Facebook fandom group, please make sure you check that out. We'll let you in there. If you play the Highlander collectible card game back in the day and still playing it, we have our sister group, the Bloody Kings Highlander CCG collectible card game and gaming discussion group page. If you'd like to contact us directly, you can email us at bloodykingspodcast@gmail.com. My name is Kevin. I am on Twitter and Instagram at Spartan_Phoenix. Lee, where can we find you?
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at The Way of the Way. It's _ between the words on Instagram.
Awesome. There's a couple of ways you can support us too. Apple Podcast, iTunes reviews. Please leave us a rated review on your podcast platform, specifically, also, especially for Apple Podcast. Please search Fandom Podcast Network and leave us a review for Bloody Kings. We love 5-star reviews, of course, but we love feedback in general. And also, if you like my Bloody Kings t-shirt that you can see here on the video, if you're, if you're listening, we always wear our cool Bloody Kings garb. Please check out our Fandom Podcast Network TeePublic store, or you can search Bloody Kings as well and get your cool Bloody Kings logo, including our Team Iron Pipe t-shirt logo as well. Support us that way. That'd be a lot of fun. First of all, next we've got, we're going to be going back to talking about Dustin Nguyen, talking about the episode Revenge of the Sword. So stay tuned for that. Lee, this has been a lot of fun, man. I appreciate you coming on as usual.
Hey, it's always fun talking Highlander, especially in the midst of a pandemic. So it gives me something to do and talk to actual people.
This is a lot of fun. I know it's been an interesting year, to say the least.
True enough.
My name is Kevin. On behalf of Lee, thanks everyone for listening, and join us again next time here on the Fandom Podcast Network for another episode of Bloody Kings, a Highlander podcast. That sensation you are feeling, Lee, is the quickening. We are one. We are brothers.
We are immortals.
Goodbye, everyone.